Good evening, seventh graders. By now, you should have read Chapter 1 in your online textbook by finishing Lesson 3 this week. Lesson 3 discusses North American Indian tribes, and that's what we're going to do as far as a lesson. You need to grab your folder. You need to turn to the page marked North American Indians. You'll find it at the conclusion of your Lesson 2 worksheets, pages 6, 7, and 8. I'm going to go through this together with you as a slideshow, and you go ahead and take notes while you're watching this video. And at the end, I will show you a sample document of what this looks like. You are going to type this information into a Google Doc and turn it in that way, whether you're coming to school or whether you're a remote learner, and we'll grade it that way rather than having everybody worry about getting their folder to me to see. So if you need to pause this video and go get your folder and a pencil, please do so. And then you can start the video back up when you're ready. We're not going to try to cover every single type of Indian tribe that lived in North America, but we are going to focus on two. We're going to focus on the mound builders and the Iroquois. The mound builders, because those were the type of Indian cultures that lived in this area of Illinois, as you can see, and this is what you want to write for mound builders. We find remains of mound civilizations as far east as the Appalachian Mountains, as far west as the Mississippi River Valley. Beardstown history tells of farmers moving into this land with mounds as far as the eye could see. There's a college that comes here every summer to dig and to excavate Indian mounds just outside of town along the Sangamon River. So we will spend a little time about them, and then we'll finish up with a very important tribe out east, the Iroquois tribe. So what you're going to write on your folder page is there are 4 different types of mounds. The first and probably the most common type are called burial mounds. So go ahead and write the word burial in that first blank. And then you also want to write a definition like you see here. Burial mounds is exactly what it means. It was for the burial of a dead man or woman and their family. Many times we find that their possessions were buried with them. Some of you have visited nearby Fulton County, Dixon Mounds, where you can peer through a window and see an entire grave site like pictured here. About 2 hours south of Beardstown is actually a world park just outside of St. Louis called Cahokia Mounds, and we will look at them in just a little bit. So understand that burial mounds are very common, that the dead oftentimes were buried on a level surface, and then dirt mounds, earthen mounds, were heaped up on top of them. The second answer that you want to include are called temple mounds. And you want to write that on the second blank. Temple mounds, like those that we find down near St. Louis, are believed to have been foundations for buildings. More than likely, they were religious temples or perhaps government buildings for city leaders. In some cases, Indian families may have built homes on top of these mounds as well. But many of these civilizations lived near rivers, and these mounds more than likely were to get them up above river levels and protect their properties in times of floods. What you see here on the right-hand side is actually called Monk's Mound down in the Cahokia site, and you can actually walk up to the top and see hundreds of miles in any direction on a clear day. The local high school actually uses this hill and this stairway to train their cross country kids. You'll find them running up and down that hill after school all the time. We don't have the remains of these buildings anymore, but the picture here on the left is a reimagining of what the buildings on top of a mound this size probably would have appeared to have done so. The city would have been at the bottom, and the temple and the other major buildings where the leaders and the upper class lived would be high up above in safety. So we have burial mounds and temple mounds. Now we're after some really unique mounds that we do find in the Midwest. So on the third blank, we want to write a math term, geometric. Geometric mounds perhaps are burial mounds. Many times, if we find these, we don't dig to look for bones and remains, but they're in the shapes of things like circles and squares, maybe even parallel lines running side by side. What these are for, nobody really knows for sure. Perhaps, as the picture suggests, they might be some type of calendar. As you can see, that full moon rising up, looking like it's adjacent to the designs of those circle patterns. Uh, Perhaps they are some type of artistic expression. Nobody really knows for sure, but they're very interesting and definitely pique our curiosity. The fourth type are also different shapes. They are a little bit more specific than just some type of square or rectangle lines. The fourth type of burial mound is probably a new word for you, effigy. So go ahead and write that in the fourth blank. Effigy mounds, again, are images or shapes, but in this case, they are actually shapes of a living creature. In most cases, probably an animal like a bird or a snake. The two pictures that you see here are from Serpent's Mound out in Ohio, and where you wouldn't be able to know the difference if you were walking through the woods from above by drone, or if you're in an airplane or helicopter, you would clearly see that this appears to be in the shape of a snake. And again, through North and South America, we have found images of birds, even human beings in these shapes. And it's very curious when these prehistoric peoples didn't have any way to be in the sky to see their images, what it took to create these types of images. And then another question is, why did they create these types of images? Were they trying to do this as some type of worship to their gods? Uh, or was there some other type of reason for doing so? We may never know. So, again, in review, to finish up our mound builders, there are four different types of mounds. We have the burial mounds, which are the most common. We know that some of these mounds were for buildings to keep them above the floodplain. And then we have these two curious types of mounds that are shapes of either geometric uh, things or actual living creatures. So we'll move on specifically after you're done taking notes here. I do have a video or so that you can watch about nearby Cahokia mounds, learn a little bit more about their civilization and culture. But as far as our notes, we want to go ahead and include here that they are near St. Louis, Missouri. The Cahokia Mounds is very unique, and I encourage you and your family to go take a weekend or day trip to go see the site. It's open to the public. There's a museum there to look through as well. They can take you on guides and show you some of the different types of mounds and some of the things that they have found in their archaeological digs. But what we do know about Cahokia Mounds is that it was probably the largest city in North America long before Columbus and the Spanish arrived to the New World. It is estimated by what they have found that there may have been as many as 40,000 people that lived there at one time. And it is believed that Cahokia was actually a trade center, comparable to maybe a New York City today, where North American tribes throughout the continent would have known that this city existed and would have traveled, maybe even through what is now your backyard, to go visit that city and buy and sell goods. So that'll conclude our lesson for the mound builders. Let's finish the bottom of the page with another important type of Indian tribe out in the Northeast, the Iroquois. The Iroquois, as far as a location, you can write there beside the word. They were probably most likely in places like Upper New York State, maybe even as far north as parts of Canada today. The Iroquois are unique because they formed a government among different groups of tribes, where others would oftentimes try to stay away from each other or actually fight for territory. This group of people found a way to get along, work together, and create something stronger as a group. And so we want to write beside the term Five Nations that the Iroquois were actually a league or a team of five different tribes. And they joined together rather than continuing to fight, and they created a unified government. So much so that some of the things that they actually established were shared and copied when the United States formed and created our Constitution. A couple more things that I would want you to know from our reading of the Iroquois. Since they did live in forests, they used that climate zone to the best of their abilities. We think of Indians, we think of living out on the Great Plains with hides of bison and deer, with teepees. The Iroquois lived in wooden houses. They created what we call long houses that probably would have contained entire families, not just a mother and father and a couple children, but all the grandparents, aunts and uncles. An entire family would have lived under one roof. I always tell my students to think of a long hallway where there are classrooms on both sides, and then, of course, the hall that would run from one end to the other. In this case, with the longhouse, left and right would be the living quarters or the beds, but you would be able to travel from one end of the house to the other and visit with different members of your family or different tasks. One thing that's unique about the Iroquois that maybe was not a situation for other tribes, there was one person in charge of this entire household, and it was mom. Mom was in charge. She put out the chores, she made sure things were done. Dad was probably off working or heading off to war. She was responsible for the care and the upkeep of the house and the family. Mothers were very important in Iroquois society. Each tribe was made up of groups of families or clans, and you identified your membership through your mother. Whereas today, in American culture, when a husband and wife marry, oftentimes they will take the name of the father. In Iroquois society, you identified by your mother's name, and what you did and how you acted out in your community reflected upon her. You didn't want to get mom mad at you by behaving poorly. Many times a young man would want the blessing of his mother because only the women got to vote. Women chose the leaders of the Iroquois tribes, not the men. Now, the men were the actual leaders, but the only way that you could get to be a leader, the only way that you could get to be the chief, is if the mothers thought you were worthy. And so, again, if you were a younger child and mom asked you to take out the trash, you took out the trash because you wanted her blessing, you wanted her favor, and it might lead to you becoming a leader of your tribe later on in life. The last thing we're going to write here for the Iroquois and finish up this assignment for today is that they had a system of trade, and they actually carried with them not actual coins, but the belt itself represented wealth or the money. It's called wampum. And this belt itself was kind of like an identification card. So when you entered a nearby village, without speaking, people knew which family you were from. They knew which tribe you had traveled from, and you were representing your family. And again, you were representing your mom. And so if word got back that you were acting inappropriately, that was going to come back to get you when mom found out. In some cases, these money belts would be exchanged as a promise for payment, perhaps for food or tools later on. And the belt was used for social status. You were very proud if you belonged to a wealthy or important family, and you proudly displayed your belt so everyone knew who you were. Pay attention to the Iroquois as we continue to study American history. They will pop up in our lessons from time to time. Living in New York, they are going to come into conflict when the European colonists begin to arrive, and they're kind of getting pushed on both sides by the British and the French. And whereas many of the nearby tribes would side with the French and fight against the British, the Iroquois actually did the opposite. The Iroquois went against their neighbors and sided with the British colonists. And you're going to see if there was a consequence to that decision or not later on in our textbook. So I'm going to click here, if I'm able to, out of the lesson and show you what your note page should actually have looked like. And so again, this was the note page that you had in your folder. You're going to find a copy of this on Google Classroom. I want you to type those notes there on the Google Doc and turn it in so that you can get credit for today's activity. But since this is the first time we've really went through a slideshow like this, I am going to end this video with what your notes should look like. I have no problem if you missed something or made a mistake for you to copy these answers. So again, wrap this up. We talked about mound builders and the Iroquois. We identified, and we wrote definitions for the 4 different types of mounds. You can see those there. And if you need to, pause the video to make sure you have everything that you need. We specifically mentioned Cahokia Mounds, just 2 hours south of Beardstown. And then we finished with a very important tribe out east, the Iroquois. I want to send you next to a couple of videos dealing with Cahokia Mounds and the mound builders down near St. Louis. Please take time to watch those videos, learn more about the Indian tribes that lived in this area. Finish up your Google Doc assignment. Hopefully that means you're done for the weekend. And we'll start seeing those of you that come back to school next Monday and Tuesday. Remote learners, you have the same assignments. I hope to hear from you soon. Stay safe, stay strong. Let's go get your work done.